Well, Attorney General Jeff Sessions was in St. Louis today meeting with law enforcement officers on efforts to fight violent crime. And during the speech, Sessions gave us a look at how he views the challenges American police face.
Unfortunately, in recent years, law enforcement as a whole has too often been unfairly maligned and blamed for the crimes and unacceptable deeds of a few in their ranks. Amid this intense public scrutiny and criticism, morale has gone down, while the murder of police officers killed in the line of duty has gone up.
But policing is not the only issue AG Sessions wants to tackle. Earlier in the week, Sessions announced that the Justice Department is taking steps to implement the president's plan to withhold federal funds from sanctuary cities. But before we get ahead of ourselves, I want to bring in CBS News' justice reporter Paula Reid to walk us through everything AG Sessions has in the works. Okay, Paula, can you actually take us through what exactly Attorney General Sessions said in that speech today?
It has been a very busy week for Attorney General Sessions, and he went to St. Louis today to lay out his approach to violent crime. Now, Rena, violent crime in the U.S. is at historic lows, but the Attorney General says that after reviewing statistics from 2015, preliminary numbers from 2016, he sees some disturbing trends. He believes that they are not aberrations, that these will continue, and he has two key points that he wants to focus on to try to prevent violent crime from continuing to increase. Specifically, he has told federal prosecutors to focus on violent offenders, specifically individuals who are caught or commit crimes with guns. This is an approach that was taken in Richmond in the 1990s when Richmond had one of the highest murder rates in the country, and it was credited at the time with creating a dramatic drop in violent crime in that city. But 20 years later, the research is sort of split on whether or not it was that specific approach that caused the violent crime to drop or whether or not it was other factors. So at this point, really, the research is just split. It's not clear whether or not that approach works. The other thing he wants to do is target our opioid and heroin epidemic. Very little controversy there. We're losing 140 people a day to drug overdoses. And it's not just about using the drugs, it's also about drug traffickers. He says he wants to target them to help reduce violent crime.
Paula, this speech, of course, was in St. Louis today. I was curious if Sessions made any mention of the suburb of Ferguson, where, of course, the police killing of Michael Brown that sparked all those protests in 2014.
That's a great question, and I was very curious to see whether or not he would reference Ferguson, because his predecessors, Attorney General Eric Holder and Loretta Lynch, would frequently mention the shooting death of Michael Brown and the unrest that followed in that city. The other fact is the Department of Justice has an ongoing agreement with that city to reform its courts and police departments, and Attorney General Sessions has said that he does not believe in that particular path, that particular way of reform. But he did reference Ferguson. He made a general reference to those events, but he took the conversation in another direction. Instead, he talked about those events and how they have given rise to what some people have described as the, quote, Ferguson effect. And that is known as police perhaps being reluctant to get out of their cars and do a lot of street beat policing for fear of public scrutiny, for fear of those viral videos. The Obama administration disputed the so-called Ferguson effect as being the reason for some increases in violent crime in certain cities, but the FBI director had endorsed that theory. Attorney General Sessions says he is also hearing that that is contributing to violent crime in some cities.
Paul, I want to move on to immigration. The Chief Justice of California's Supreme Court is accusing federal immigration authorities of stalking local courthouses to try and round up undocumented immigrants. How is Sessions responding to this characterization?
Well, Attorney General Sessions and the head of the Department of Homeland Security sent a letter to California's chief judge. They took issue with her use of that language, stalking. They called it troubling, and they told her that the reason that ICE is at some courthouses and making some arrests is because, as they say, some jurisdictions are not cooperating with federal law enforcement in their immigration enforcement efforts. Now, after this letter was made public, some people from the ACLU have responded. They say that this letter does not actually acknowledge the extent of the sweeps, and they also say that it appears that the Attorney General is saying that ICE's presence at these courthouses is, quote, retaliation for sanctuary city policies.
Paul, last night Sessions said that the federal government will speed up deportations of immigrants held in federal facilities. When do you think this might start happening, and how many deportations are we potentially talking about here?
That's right. Over this week, Attorney General Sessions has certainly made it clear that he intends to use all the tools at his disposal to aggressively enforce the immigration laws on the books. This is one of the things that he has put forth. He said he's going to put more resources towards being able to hold deportation proceedings for people who have been sent to federal prisons. If you're convicted of a crime, you're serving a federal prison sentence. He's trying to make it so that you can have your deportation proceeding either in person or via video teleconference while you're in prison. So as soon as your sentence done, the U.S. government can deport you. In terms of how big an impact this will have, and we have to remember most criminals in this country are held in state and local facilities, not federal prisons, and not all federal prisons will even have these kinds of resources. But it appears that he is trying to throw money at this as one way to aggressively enforce and deport people who are here illegally.
Okay, and finally, Paula, in the White House press briefing Monday, Sessions announced that the federal government would cut funding for sanctuary cities. Is this a legal move, and is it going to be challenged in the courts?
It is absolutely going to be challenged in courts. There have already been lawsuits filed, for example, by Seattle challenging this. And Rena, it's clear Democrats don't have a lot of recourse for the Trump administration's policies outside of the courts. That's why we're seeing all these lawsuits against the travel ban. Here again, we're seeing the courts as the key point of recourse. And Rena, it's just not clear. I've talked to some experts, and it's just not clear the extent to which the Department of Justice will be able to withhold federal funding from these sanctuary cities. Some case law does support those sanctuary cities being able to argue that they should not have to enforce federal laws. But there's other case law that shows that, well, if the federal government can show that those grants are connected to certain policies, they may be able to do it. So, Rena, that will be a fascinating issue to watch as it works its way through the courts.
And the cities rely on DOJ grants to fight violent crime. So how does the Violent Crime Initiative square with the Sanctuary Cities announcement?
It's going to be really complicated because if there is a sanctuary city that's trying to get money from the Department of Justice to combat violent crime and they can't, that's really going to put two of the Attorney General's key priorities at odds. And they'll probably have to assess that on a case-by-case basis. But we're still watching to see which cities are going to double down and continue to be so-called sanctuary cities, and which cities are just going to agree with the administration and decide to indeed help them enforce federal immigration law.
Paula Reid in Washington. Paula, thank you.